This is the eLearning Podcast, episode number 5.
I think that it's important that, we're honest with our children and with students. They're very aware. They pick up on things in their surroundings. They're a lot more observant, sometimes way more than we give them credit for. We can still be empathetic. We can still tailor it to their needs and to their understanding, but we still need to have these conversations.
Hello and welcome to the eLearning Podcast from lmspulse.com. My name is Stephen Laddick and I'm the director at LMS Pulse. My guest for our 5th episode is Brittany Smith. Brittany is a preschool teacher in Atlantic City, New Jersey, who also blogs at wanderingbrit.com. Last June, Brittany's Twitter thread about children's books that discuss race and racism went viral, and it's been shared on the social network more than 200,000 times. Since that tweet, she's been invited to countless outlets to talk about this, including Time, NPR, Good Morning America, BuzzFeed, and The Kelly Clarkson Show. Her thread didn't come out of nowhere. Digitally savvy and child-focused, Brittany is fully aware of the power of technologies to spark conversations and generate a sense of closeness and community. And I have no doubt you're going to hear that in our conversation. In this episode, Brittany and I have a really fun time talking about why children should not be underestimated when it comes to using digital technologies to learn, engage, and feel connected. We also talk about why they shouldn't be underestimated when it comes to sensing the seriousness of current events. In fact, her research that she talks about, shows that shielding them at a young age can actually exacerbate prejudice for the rest of their lives. We also talk about the power of technologies like social media to spark fruitful conversation, even among the young, about difficult topics. We also talk about what it's like to teach in a truly diverse preschool. She talks about kids from Haiti, from Mexico, from Vietnam, from Bangladesh, from Albania, a literal global classroom that she works in. And finally, we talk about what tech and media companies, including e-learning ones, can learn about tackling issues of racism and social justice and meaningfully contribute to the conversation around race. But before we get started, here's a quick word from our sponsors.
The eLearning Podcast is sponsored by the eLearning Success Summit. Learn from more than 40 experts how to teach, work, and learn online without being overwhelmed. Get your free ticket to the summit at elearningsuccesssummit.com. And lmspulse.com, your best source for news, information, and resources for e-learning professionals for more than 10 years. Get our free roundup of the week's top news at lmspulse.com.
Hi, Brittany. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. So glad to be here.
My pleasure. Where do we find you sitting today?
I am sitting in New Jersey. I'm located right outside of Atlantic City in a town called Egg Harbor Township.
Cool. We're recording this in August of 2020, just for the record here. Has school started where you are? You still going out to the beach? Or are you staying inside? I don't know where coronavirus stands in New Jersey right now.
School has not started yet. We will be starting September 3rd. As of now, I'm just enjoying my beach days, trying to enjoy the weather as much as possible while still social distancing.
Yeah, sure. We wanted to have you on the show because you've had some really interesting information, particularly a blog post, a tweet, that went viral, that is, really prescient for what's happening in the world today and what's, kind of some of the issues that we're facing, at least in the culture in the United States right now, but probably globally as well, if we really want to think about it. But before we dive into that, before we jump into that whole thing, tell us a little bit about yourself. Like, what's your connection to education? What's your background? Who are you?
Yeah, so currently I'm an educator. I've been teaching pre-K for the past going on 5 years now. So my students are ages 4 and 5. I teach pre-K in Atlantic City at one of the elementary schools. And given the location, it's a very urban setting. I have such a diverse background when it comes to the faces in my classroom and my families and my students. My students really come from all over the world. So we're looking at Haiti, Mexico, Vietnam, Bangladesh, Albania. Like it's insane when you think about just how diverse and amazing my classroom is. So I've been doing that, like I said, going on 5 years now. Absolutely love it. I had gone to school at Rowan University where I received my bachelor's degree in early childhood education. So this is 100% my specialty and what I focus on and what I love. And I'm currently receiving my master's of education in teacher leadership. where I actually just finished also receiving my ESL certification, which certifies me to teach English as a second language. So that's a little bit of my background. Born and raised in New Jersey, and yeah, so that's a little bit about me.
And now that you're preparing for the school year to come right now, and you were obviously a part of the school year before, what has there been any tips or tricks or special things or innovative ideas that you implemented during remote learning that you might want to share with everybody that worked for you?
Right. Well, so it's definitely been an adjustment period, and it's a lot of trial and error right now. But some of the things that I've done for my own classroom is, I think a lot of teachers do this, is the use of an app to communicate with parents and with students. That's
which one? I want you to plug the app. Which app did you use?
So I use the Remind app right now, but it's called the Remind app. It's nice because I can translate my messages into different languages. And like I said, because my families come from so many different backgrounds, a lot of their home languages are not English. So it's really convenient in that sense. But I'm still in the search for the perfect app. I'm not quite sure yet. But that's what I've been using. And I created a YouTube channel for my families and my students where I upload lessons, read aloud videos for them to watch and to kind of see my face and to still feel connected like they're in the classroom. I just started utilizing too, Google Classroom. Well, let me rephrase that. It's a Google slide, and you create your own virtual Google Classroom. So it's a little Bitmoji of my character, if you're not familiar, and my little classroom setup, and the kids can click on the different items within my classroom, and it brings them to different links, whether it's a website that's informational or one of my YouTube videos. And so that's been actually a really helpful and fun interactive way to kind of help my students learn through this process.
Now, would you just describe that? You sound super savvy, right? Like you're like, oh, of course, I'm using a Google Slide, Google Classroom, blah, blah, blah. Now, was this supported by your district? Was this, hey, you're just Brittany and you're a badass and you put it all together? Or is this what all of your teachers are doing? Or?
Yeah, it's a little bit of both. So I will say this is what our pre-K grade level is doing. One of our music teacher at my school, shout out to Ms. Ketzel, she is the one that kind of brought it to our attention, and then pre-K kind of took it and ran off with it. And so now it's something that all of the pre-K teachers are utilizing. I will say it did take a little bit of finessing and watching some YouTube videos to figure out just how it works and how to set up this virtual classroom. But once you get the gist of it, it's actually pretty simple. It's just very repetitive and just a matter of kind of changing the layout and changing the scenery when appropriate.
Super cool. And I know that you didn't come here prepared to talk, ed tech with me, which
no worries.
We talk about that, but the podcast, we wanted to focus on education writ large in this new normal. We wanted to looking at different ways people are getting information out there, how they're spreading messages, how they're putting information in front of students, and how they're receiving feedback and adapting, and teachers are learning as well. So let's talk about this, this moment that you've had now. I'm trying not to mention it because I want you to describe it. Tell me about this, this viral post, this viral tweet that you had, and just sort of take me through that process first, and then we'll talk about the content.
Okay. So, let's talk about, the why behind it. So we're looking at the current state of affairs within our country and even across the nation, really. And we were seeing a lot of protests in regards to George Floyd's death, a lot of protests in regards to the Black Lives Matter movement as a whole. And it was sparking, obviously, debate, conversations about how to become better allies, the changes that need to be made within our country, and just how to support people and how to be kinder to one another. And I noticed that there wasn't a lot of conversation about how do we have this conversation with children? Are we having this conversation with children? And it was something that was in the back of my mind. And, it's been a lot just as a Black woman myself, going through the world with the current state of affairs and teaching and trying to advocate for myself, but also for my students. And so I kept that in mind. And then Nickelodeon and actually Viacom, which is their whole corporation, had released, they had gone off air for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, which was symbolic of George Floyd's death. And it was to spread awareness, to raise a message, and to be in support of the protest and this movement as a whole. And after that happened, and after that was released on Nickelodeon specifically, it sparked a lot of, I will say, some outrage by some parents, as they felt like it was too uncomfortable for children. They felt like it wasn't appropriate, that children are too young, was a lot of the conversations, a lot of the comments that I was seeing, especially on Twitter. And as an educator myself, someone that's worked with children for the past 5 years and really has studied this, I felt like that's not necessarily the case, and that actually isn't the case at all. And this is a conversation that we need to have. As uncomfortable as it is, it's a very clear reality of the world that we're living in. And so with that, I decided to create a tweet. And at the time, I had a few hundred followers that I thought would appreciate it. They were parents, their teachers, my friends. And the tweet consisted of 15 to 20 books, children's books specifically, all that discussed race and racism. And I felt like this is perfect timing to show people that, hey, like there are books out there that help prompt these conversations that we need to have, that help show you can have these conversations with children, and they're somewhat easily accessible to us. And so that was what led me to create my now viral tweet.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And blog post now, right? Sure. I mean, you've been on any, we're this tiny little media channel, but I mean, you've been on NPR, you've been on Fox, you've been all over the place. This has been a really thrust into the limelight for you in a lot of ways.
Yeah, it really has. It's insane because I wasn't expecting that. So like I said, I had a few hundred followers. Since the tweet went viral literally overnight, it's garnered over 400,000 likes, 200,000 retweets. And, these are coming from obviously parents, teachers, administrators, librarians, but also celebrities, politicians, athletes, actors and actresses. So there's people across the spectrum of our world that were sharing this information. And I just got so much feedback, positive feedback for it, which led me to creating my blog, Wandering Brit, where I then created a more cohesive list for people to follow, because not everyone's so savvy on Twitter.
So I want to go to the content, because I want you to pick out some of your favorites in that list and why you chose them. Before you do that, I want you to sort of make the connection back to, this remote learning that you've been doing and whatnot. And then parents' reactions to that Nickelodeon black screen, right? Where they're like, oh, kids aren't going to be able to handle this. Kids can't do that. Or maybe it's just a protective stance, right? I mean, everybody knows who's listening to this. They've been listening for, I have 3 kids, I got, all in that same age range. And kids are so much smarter than anybody gives, and adults give them credit for, right?
Absolutely.
What's the question I want to ask you? The question is, was your reaction that was it like, look, I put a web page up and my kids they know where to click and they know how to do this and they know how to give me feedback. And it's like, this is just a no-brainer. I've got to get this message out there. Or are you just much more empathetic to parents because you've been doing this forever? And it's like, look, let me take it step by step and, be kind. Like what was your reaction to that? And how are you, continuing to deal with that?
Right. So at the time when I created my tweet, obviously, like I had mentioned, with the current state of the country, we've been seeing protests nationally across the globe. We actually had just had, the day before my tweet, protests in Atlantic City. And I know that had to lead to conversations within my children's households as far as what's happening. And I'm sure that there are some parents that chose to ignore it and act like nothing's happening. I think that it's important that, we're honest with our children and with students, because like you mentioned, they're very aware. They pick up on things in their surroundings. They're a lot more observant, sometimes way more than we give them credit for. And so it's really important that, to me, in my opinion, and based off of what I know, that we really do have these conversations with children. We can still be empathetic. We can still tailor it to their needs and to their understanding, but we still need to have these conversations. And, studies have shown that by 6 months, babies, infants, they can determine or differentiate between race, right? They can tell that someone is a different color than, their caregiver.
Wow.
So we know that, the whole children are colorblind thing is a myth. I understand that we want to preserve innocence for children, but this is a harsh reality of our world. And for me, given that I work in an inner city, a lot of my students are students of color. And so I have to think in the long run, how is this going to affect them? How are they going to move through the world? And how can I better this world for them? And so that was part of it, what led me to, create this thread of books. And I also know that by preschool age, which is my students, they start to show prejudice depending on races. So that's something too that parents don't necessarily realize, but it's a reality. And you look at tests like that baby doll test. I don't know if you're familiar.
I don't know that one. What's the baby doll test?
So the doll test, I don't know if I doubt that's the correct title for it, but it was an experiment. And it's been consistently proven time and time again, where a group of preschool age children were brought into a room and they were shown different babies. One was brown, one was white. And they were asked to, pick their favorite doll, pick the doll that they thought was nicer, pick the doll that they thought was mean. And time again, these preschool age children would always choose the white doll as being the nice one, as being the preferred one. And this ran across the board even for Black children. So it kind of shows this, this concept that they're starting to build at such an early age. And, they're 4 and 5 years old now. So only imagine if we don't have these conversations with them, these very clear conversations with them, how that thought process can end up developing into their adulthood.
Sure.
And so I created this list of books, and I just wanted parents to see that, there are easily accessible ways that you can have these sometimes uncomfortable conversations. And, one of those most simplest ways is through books. And I know that as a teacher, as a pre-K teacher especially, I teach so many lessons with my students, especially social emotional skills and character development and friendship, things of that nature. I always teach, not always, but a good portion of the time, I will teach through children's books. It's just one of those ways that they can kind of easily relate. And I thought that would just be, a simple way to kind of show parents, other teachers, whoever really, that, hey, we can have these conversations. And one of the simplest ways is, with a book that can help prompt, a larger discussion.
Sure,
So.
absolutely. So take us to your favorites. Maybe, I don't know if you want to run through the whole list, obviously, because there's an awful lot of books there. If you even remember them off the top of your head.
Yeah, I cannot.
Maybe what are your 3 or 4 favorite, 3 or 4 favorites and why?
So I would say Hair Love is one of my favorites. That one's by Matthew A. Cherry. He is a former athlete, and it actually turned into a short film, a short motion picture that ended up winning awards. It's incredible. It'll make you cry. I watched the relationship between a father and daughter, and just the difficulties that especially young Black children face when it comes to their hair, and sometimes the frustrations that can occur because of it. I think that's such a great, beautiful book. I really love Intersection Allies, We Make Room for All. This book is written by all women of color, and they're also sociologists. And they kind of help discuss in a beautiful prose, everything's rhyming, which kids love. It discusses the just various issues that we see in our country, whether that be racism or protesting or, people with disabilities. It focuses on we make room for all. So it focuses on just the differences that we see in the world and how we can befriend these people that are different than us, which I think is great. There is The Proudest Blue, a story of hijab and family. And that one was written by, she is an Olympic, I want to say fencer. don't quote me on that, but she was in the Olympics, and she's the first woman to wear her hijab while competing in the Olympics. And so she went on to create a book, and it's about two sisters and their first day of school, and the older sister's wearing her hijab for the first day of school, which is different for a lot of children, and some of the ridicule, I guess you could say, that she faced that day because of it. And at the time when I was introduced to that book, I had a student in my classroom who was Muslim, and she would wear her hijab to school, and it prompted a lot of questions from other students. And I felt like, oh, this is a perfect opportunity. Let's pull in a book. And it worked really well in my classroom. I loved it. I would say that those are definitely my top three for sure.
Awesome. No, those are, and those all, they all present different pieces of the story. And it just starts to put together the mosaic of all of the different, pieces of diversity that are out there, right? Like even just, all three of those are very unique.
Right. And like I said, the list is about like 15, 20 books long. And, other people had added on my Twitter thread books that I hadn't even heard of before. So it's nice to check out and to see which of those 20 books, if those three don't resonate with you, which other ones, are out there that might suit you better.
How do you present a book in today's online remote learning world? I mean, is this something where you can pre-record it and you read it and then, that's a video that they watch while you're doing that? Or is there actually an interactive piece that you do with your students? Or is there something, I'll stop there. I won't put words in your mouth.
So unfortunately, I'm not able to do like a Zoom chat with my students. That's just our district policy for the moment, at least for pre-K students.
Okay.
But like I had mentioned earlier, so I created my YouTube channel, and on my YouTube channel, I will introduce, the new book for the day. And I'll read it, but I'll read it as if I was interacting with my students. So I will ask open-ended questions. I will point out things. I'll stop for us to count, I'll stop for us to point out different themes or, items that we're seeing within the illustrations. And, I do that pretty consistently throughout the entire book. And then at the very end, I'll ask another question for my students, and I'll say, if you liked this book, or if there was something you noticed, or, whatever the theme of that book might be, I might ask an overarching question. And I'll say, make sure you respond in our app. And so then that gives people, my parents, my students, an opportunity to communicate with me, and so that I know that they're actually engaged in the books that I'm presenting. So that's worked thus far.
Nice. What about, what's happened now that since, you've had this thing kind of blow up on you a little bit in a good way? Have you found yourself being a spokesperson? And have you been contacted obviously by media channels, but by others, or to produce material? Like, what's been the outcome for you? Or has there not been any effect?
Oh, no. There's definitely been an effect that I was not expecting. I'm still kind of mind blown by all of this, to be completely honest. It has gotten so much positive feedback. So like I had mentioned, a lot just to kind of, one, thank me for producing that list, but also to say that they were going to be incorporating it within their curriculums, within their classrooms. So that has been phenomenal to just see the change that has made on its own. And then as far as for me, it has prompted me to start to create my own children's books, which has been a goal of mine for such a long time. Yeah, because my second bachelor's degree is in liberal studies, which also focused on English and writing. And so in those courses, I would take how to write a children's book. Like, that was a course that I took. And I always said that I wanted to do that. So that's kind of prompted me to do that. I've created my blog, my website, and it's also just sparked a lot of different interviews for myself. I've networked with a lot of people I wouldn't have otherwise. I recently did an interview maybe last month with Kelly Clarkson for her talk show.
Wow.
Yeah, that was pretty insane. I did one for Sarah Strahan and Kiki, which was, a part of Good Morning America. And then even locally, just obviously receiving recognition from my administrators and my colleagues, and, you know, the Press of Atlantic City, which is our local newspaper, they had me on the cover. So it's prompted a lot of positive feedback, which I'm really thankful for. I haven't really seen much negative.
I was just gonna say, we're the haters. Come on.
Right.
In every
they're
comment thread,
they're everywhere. They're everywhere. You know, here and there, I'll see a comment and it's the typical, you know, that's nice, but children don't need to worry about these things. And children are color, and they're too young. They don't care. They don't understand. And, you know, and again, I chalk that up to, it really is, for lack of a better words, it's just ignorance in regards to children's development and just how intelligent children are. But other than that, everything has really just been very positive, and it's definitely provided some great opportunities. Matthew Cherry, who wrote Hair Love, had reached out to me and asked how he could help me with my own book. So it's been pretty incredible for sure.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
What's your hopes? I mean, obviously you want to write a book. Do you have a character already that you want to reveal now, or maybe not, or do you have a theme?
So to be completely honest, there's like several ideas that I have kind of in the works. I haven't sat down to focus on just one book. I feel like I kind of add a little bit to this book, add a little bit to this book. I'm kind of all over the place with it, but it is, you know, I would like to just focus on diversity as being one of my main books. Another one would just be through the lens of a young Black child. And I, you know, something that I would also like to point out in regards to my book list is that a lot of it, as it does discuss racism, it also just features so much diversity within those books. And as a teacher, I realized that representation within the classroom setting especially is really, really important for students. It's important for their development, their self-esteem. And I can say, you know, growing up as a child, especially in like a public school setting that was more in the suburbs, there wasn't much diversity within my classrooms, and there wasn't much diversity within, you know, the medias that we saw. So whether that be, you know, the videos we were watching or the books that we had to read, the books, you know, that I had access to, even a lot of times they didn't feature young girls of color, especially young
girls, basically, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
right,
even just young girls. Let's not even get like, gosh, you know, it was.
Exactly. And so for me, knowing that I didn't have that growing up and thinking what kind of difference it could make to have something like that even more available for other young girls, I think is really important. And so that is also another reason why I would like to focus on that for my books. There's really just so many different ideas. I have gotten my blog, like I said, up and running, Wandering Brit, which I'm still getting accustomed to. It's a learning curve. But I do enjoy it. It's fun. It's a whole new world, this online stuff.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So final question for you. How will this, you know, remote learning, and then now you've got a little bit of, let's call it fame for right now, you know, you've a little bit of recognition. How is that going to change how you're delivering, you know, to your students? Are you saying, look, I've discovered some new ways to do it, and you're going to incorporate that going forward, even when we return to the classroom? Or is there any sort of real particular message of what you've learned over this process that you would like to share to other teachers?
Yeah, so for both of those things, for the first part of that question, once I realized just how much positive feedback I was getting, you know, I kind of reevaluated my own teaching. You know, I was like, I had to ask myself, am I doing my students enough of a service when it comes to diversity within literature? Which for the most part, I definitely am. I will say that I was pretty mindful of that. But I think as teachers, it's really important that we constantly reevaluate. And so I was more mindful about rereading those books to my students via my YouTube channel and sending them out and reaching out to my parents as far as, with all of the things going on within our city and just within the country, being available to them for any resources or support that they needed to have those conversations. I also, this summer, starting tomorrow actually, I'm part of our district's summer learning task force, which basically will help develop and create the curriculum come September. A lot of it will focus on remote learning specifically. And I got hired to focus on the social studies aspect, which for preschool, again, will focus a lot on, diversity and self-esteem and confidence and things of that nature, just knowing yourself and your community. And so that will be what I'm focused on for our pre-K grade level for the rest of the summer, which will then be used for all of our teachers, which I think is, really important. Our school does this every year, but this will be my first year actually being a part of that team. So I'm excited for that. Also, I will say that Hard Rock in Atlantic City, their CEO he put together a team of African Americans to sit down and have roundtable discussions about changes that could be made within the community. And one of the things that they wanted to talk about was, what changes need to be made within our school settings, or how can Hard Rock and the community better support our school settings? And so I'll be joining them for a conversation as well, sometime, I want to say the middle of this month. So there's a lot of larger discussions that will be continuing to take place because of all of this, which I think is great. It's definitely necessary. And as far as, having this conversation to other teachers, I think that, it's really important that we're mindful that we're teaching anti-racism and having representation, like I mentioned, and inclusion within our school settings. And we have to, sometimes take a step back and analyze and self-reflect our own biases that we might have, and how does that impact our students, if it does or if it doesn't, and how can we just be more mindful of this everyday situation that a lot of our students will face? How can we better support them? And, for me personally, again, as a Black woman, like I have a little bit more insight than another teacher might because of that. But I think it's really important that we engage in dialogue with our communities, with our families, with our colleagues, to kind of figure out ways to better support them and have these conversations. And especially with remote learning, it's really like, how do we now finagle this situation to technology? Because it's obviously necessary given what's going on with the pandemic. So those are definitely some of the things that are, in mind right now.
Awesome. Brittany, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today. Really, really appreciate it. I wish you all the luck. I can't wait to, see what happens 6 months from now and, see how you continue to flourish. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. This is a great chat. I loved it.
Thanks again for tuning into today's episode of the eLearning Podcast. If you like what you've learned today in this episode, I encourage you to either follow us or subscribe to us on Facebook or Twitter or YouTube. And please do share this episode with one or two of your colleagues or friends. Also, I just want to remind you that you can level up your online learning game with all of the information that's available at the eLearning Success Summit. You can get your free ticket at elearningsuccesssummit.com. And finally, you can also stay up to date on everything that's important, all the news and the resources for e-learning professionals at lmspulse.com. Get our free newsletter by just going to lmspulse.com today. Thanks again.